And he said, just hang up with me and call the fire department. So we called. They came right away, like within minutes, 2 minutes. Blake on the end here was leading the crew that night, and he came. It was kind of funny because we don't, we're not friends, but I had seen Blake around at the school where our kids go, so it was almost like it was meant to be. And he gave Wick a thorough checkup, made sure that he was okay in that moment, but he said, look, after what he's just been through, he's got to go spend the night at the hospital, and we can take him there or you can take him there. So we ended up taking Wick to the hospital. He had some fluid in his lungs, but he was fine and kind of fully recovered after the next day. But we're so grateful to the fire department just for their responsiveness, just putting us at ease in that moment when you're just so frightened and you don't know what's going on. And then just kind of even the rudimentary training in CPR that I had, I think that helped in some small way. So we're so grateful that this guy is standing here now. And I think the message, if there's a message for anybody, I think, living in Arizona, you hear it just takes a few seconds message, and that's true. You don't realize how true it is until it happens to you. And I think sort of the lie that I believed was that, as long as I'm out with my kids, this can't happen. But it happened while I was in the pool with my kids, so just like that. So if you have some training, if you don't have training, get some training. And then we're just so lucky to live in a place where we've got first responders like these. So thank you very much.
I'm Stephen Dudley. I'm the building official for the city of Phoenix, and I'm here with our IBC structural technical lead, John Joseph Proska, and we're going to talk about the lessons that we've learned from 9/11 and the importance of that event in evolving the building codes and making buildings safer for its occupants and for the emergency responders who have to rush into those buildings. I know I had taken my son to get some surgery that morning, and we're sitting in the waiting room watching this happen on television, and it just seemed unbelievable. At first you thought, well, a plane ran into the building and caused some minor damage to the outside of it, but as you watched it and saw another plane hit the other building, and then to watch the buildings actually collapse, just seemed it was surreal. It seemed unbelievable, that buildings of that size could simply be reduced to a pile of rubble in a matter of minutes.
I was in high school at the time, actually, and I remember just being out in sort of a central yard, I think between classes, when we all got an announcement over the PA, and we got separated into various rooms, and we ended up watching. And I remember, I think the thing that stays with me the most were the screams you heard on the live feed when people saw the second plane coming in to that second tower. I think that's probably the moment that sticks with me the most, is just the recognition by people in the crowd that this was not an accident and that something horrific was going on. I think it's important to remember how horrible it was, even though it's not good to dwell on how horrible it was. It's important to keep it in mind so that we realize the changes and the steps that were taken since then to try to prevent it or assist in responses to it since then are actually important steps, and there's very good reasons for them.
JJ and I are involved in detailed review and code issues of building design, including high-rise buildings, and of course the Twin Towers are what we consider to be skyscrapers, term that's used sometimes for buildings that are more than 420 feet tall. You're never going to do anything to keep a building from being destroyed by having jet planes fly into it. I mean, it's virtually impossible. But what we've seen are changes in the code to help buy people time. That's what I always reflect on. You know, if those towers had stayed up for another 30 minutes or another hour, how many more people would have gotten out? How much more successful would the emergency rescue operation have been in saving people? And that's really what the changes in the codes are after, is to try to buy people more time.
There were some issues potentially with the fireproofing in the World Trade Center towers. It's not really clear if it came off during impact or if it had come off before. But you know, one of the, I think the key changes they had to the structure was having that, essentially the fuzzy stuff that goes on the steel, making the fuzzy stuff just grip that steel a whole lot better and more robustly. So I think that's one of the more important changes that came about. And as far as the longevity and the time component, I think there's various changes that took place that are really important ones. I know you and I had been discussing, there's various items, not necessarily just with increased time, but also with more useful time. So there was items like an additional stairwell. When you are in that skyscraper or the over 420 feet tall bit like that, the code now requires you to have an additional stairway in your building. So you're not trying to jam too many people down too small of holes trying to get out of there, or if you're a firefighter trying to get in there.
The code also mandated some stricter requirements for separating those stairs in the building, so that if one becomes compromised, there's a chance that the other one will remain more viable for the purpose of getting out. As well as making it possible for the occupants to use the elevators to get out of a high-rise.
Right.
Again, just increasing the ease with which to evacuate a building like that. They made the stairs easier to use too. There's now requirements for what the code calls photoluminescent markings in the stairs, on the treads, on the railings, on the doors, essentially glow-in-the-dark markings that in case the primary and backup power systems in the building fail, that the exit stairs aren't plunged into total darkness.
Right.
Which occurred, of course, during the World Trade Center event, and so again, it's an enhancement to make it easier to get out of the building, to evacuate the building.
Some of the changes that I know that they had into the building code as a result of this is bumping up the actual fire resistance rating that you would get on your columns themselves and on your girders. And even on the elements that brace those from stopping them from falling over. So I guess as the brief reminder here is that buildings are made up out of individual components, you know, columns, beams, girders, that kind of a thing. And they don't act well on their own. You can't have a column that's the height of a skyscraper and assume it to just stay there. It all interacts with each other, and so there's some elements in buildings that actually brace those columns from buckling to the side, and even those were recognized as crucial elements, and they got a little bit more fire rating in them because of, well, the horrific incidents of 9/11.
Yeah, I think the other aspect too, and this is true of building safety in general, but certainly especially true of a very tall building, is that everyone thinks about the safety and the ability of the occupants to leave the building, but just as important is protecting the emergency responders who are running into the building to save people, and making it easier for them to do that and for them to rescue people. And a lot of the code changes that were made address that, you know, adding dedicated fire service access elevators for firefighters to get to people easier and to haul their heavy equipment up, you know, what's obviously a very tall building,
yeah,
to make the rescue efforts easier.
That's definitely a challenging one, and also probably an incredibly good change. I mean, as you point out, they're hauling up oxygen tanks, they're hauling up all these things up these incredibly tall buildings, and before, and even sometimes still now, you have to just share the stairwell with the people who are getting out as you're a firefighter trying to get up to fight the fire. And so the introduction of those fire service access elevators are essentially just an elevator that's a little bit more robust, a little bit safer, is now required in the building codes so that those firefighters can use that elevator to get to the floors where the fire might be. I guess as a slight pivot, but one thing I think I wanted to make sure we discuss during this is the change to some of the actual structural interconnection requirements. And I know that there'll be more lessons learned and things coming out of other building failures as we continue to learn this, but as I was getting at before, buildings are just made up of components, especially their structure. And for instance, a building will stand up if you just put a beam on top of columns. It'll just sit there fine. But if something else in the building is under distress, that beam that's just sitting on top of columns is not really going to help you out. It's not going to help hold up the rest of the building. And so one of the changes for very important structures that came into play was interconnection between all the different structural elements. So, for instance, that beam that's sitting on a column, it now no longer could just sit on the column. It needs to be robustly attached to that column, such that if the beam next to it ends up going, it has a little bit of help to the other parts of the building, and the whole thing's not necessarily just going to tumble down as one if one component fails.
That also brings to mind the concept of redundancy. Now, the building codes require 2 separate water supply lines for every fire sprinkler zone in a tall building, so that if for any reason the initial water supply line is compromised, you still have a backup providing water to run the sprinklers in a building, and that concept of redundancy becomes very important, an added layer of safety, again, to keep the building up and at least buy people more time to get out.
I think of NIST, or the National Institute of Standards and Technology. They ended up going through and doing a very good job writing a report on the failures and outlining proposed changes. And a lot of those proposed changes did make it into the de facto national building codes. You know, I'm glad that organization exists, and it did such fine work during that investigation. And also that they're going to keep doing that for future failures, like the failure we had in Surfside in Florida. So I just wanted to say it's a very large help that national organizations like NIST exist to inform building codes in our country. Some
of the changes are a little more subtle, but again, just trying to help the firefighters to do their job. Things like mandating lobbies to access the fire service access elevators to provide space for the firefighters to stage their equipment, requiring larger fire command centers in the building, again, so that they can monitor the situation and stage their people and stage the equipment that they're using. Again, making it easier, making it more efficient for them to rescue people and get them out of the building. The International Code Council, who actually writes most of the building codes that we adopt, took that to heart and incorporated so many of those recommendations into the building codes that we use today. And they continue to do so. You know, the codes are rewritten every 3 years, and you continue to see improvements made, again, for both those purposes, you know, getting people out and helping to get the emergency responders in. Yeah, I think building designs in general have improved as a result, even as the result of something as terrible as a terrorist attack. You know, as a result, here we are 20 years later with high-rise buildings that are much safer, right, because of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, I think of we're lucky in the U.S. to have these sets of building codes, at least in the jurisdictions that choose to adopt them. If you end up putting out a Google alert for building collapses or building failures, there's some repeat offender countries where these things always collapse and kill a bunch of people, and it's very sad. But it's, I think, a good reminder for why we have these and why we need to continue to have them to keep people safe.
Sometimes enforcing the building codes is difficult because a lot of times the stuff that we demand in our codes costs money, adds to the cost of a project, and I don't. The one thing I've learned from things like this is I don't apologize for enforcing the building codes because they're not arbitrary, they're not bureaucratic collections of requirements. They're extremely important. A lot of the requirements in the building codes, the evolution of the building codes is a result of past failures or events, even something as catastrophic as a terrorist attack. But they're designed to keep people safe. And so I understand the importance. An event like 9/11 just taught me again how important the building codes are and the importance of enforcing them because they keep people safe, they save people's lives, and they save the lives and protect the lives of the emergency responders.
Good morning. Welcome to the City of Phoenix's Public Safety and Justice Subcommittee on October 4th. I'd like to call the meeting to order. I first want to go to our attorney to explain public comments.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. During citizen comment, members of the public may address the subcommittee for up to 3 minutes on issues of interest or concern to them. The Arizona Open Meetings Law permits the subcommittee members to listen to the comments, but prohibits members from discussing or acting on the matters presented. Members of the public may speak for up to 2 minutes to comment on agenda items to be discussed. Comments must be related to the agenda item and the action being considered by the subcommittee. The City Council and staff cannot discuss or comment on matters related to pending investigations, claims, or litigation.
Thank you so much. And do we have an interpreter to introduce themselves?
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Elsie Duarte, and I will be servicing as Spanish interpreter for today's Public Safety and Justice Subcommittee session. I will now take a moment to introduce myself to our Spanish-speaking audience and review some guidelines. Buenos días, bienvenidos a la sesión de la Subcomisión de Seguridad Pública y Justicia. Mi nombre es Elsie Duarte y estaré sirviéndoles hoy como intérprete a nuestra audiencia de habla hispana. Deseamos pedirles antemano si va a dar un comentario público, por favor hable despacio, con claridad y evite tener distracciones de fondo. Finalmente, pausa después de cada 1 o 2 oraciones para poder interpretar lo que esté diciendo de la manera más completa posible. Gracias. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you so much, Elsie. Our first item of, first, do we have any call to the public today?
Madam Chair, we do not.
Thank you so much. So our first item of business will be the approval of minutes. Do I have a motion to approve?
Move to approve.
Of a motion, do I have a second?
Second.
Of a motion and a second. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously. So today, due to some scheduling conflicts for some of our presenters, we are going to go to item 4, traffic safety and speed enforcement strategies. For that item, we have Assistant Chief Sean Kennedy, apparently I don't read very well, Streets Director Keeney Knutson.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee. I'm here to provide a brief overview of the traffic unit, as well as some of the efforts to improve safety on the roadways in the city of Phoenix. Over the years, the traffic unit has grown from a one-person motorcycle officer unit to a unit that had over 130 officers in the early 2000s, to its current staffing level of 43 motorcycle officers. Today's traffic unit staffing consists of 1 lieutenant, 8 sergeants, 2 commercial vehicle inspectors, 6 traffic and education safety squad officers, 4 DUI van operators, 22 enforcement motorcycle officers, and 4 civilian support staff. With the reduced number of officers assigned to the traffic unit, we've had to be more strategic in how we utilize our resources. In April of 2022, the traffic unit adjusted strategy and placed a greater emphasis on enforcement. One of the ways we do this is through the use of traffic impact programs. Locations for traffic impact programs are identified through data-driven evaluation based on collision data and radar trailer information. We also utilize traffic impact programs based on community concern or complaint. Once an area is identified, a group of 5 to 10 traffic unit motor officers will spend 4 to 6 hours in the area focusing on primary complaints or concerns. Each of our enforcement squads will conduct at least 1 traffic impact program per week. This averages to approximately 18 per month for the unit. Originally, traffic impact program data was recorded with all other enforcement efforts by the traffic unit. Since July of this year, we started separating the data specifically for traffic impact programs. Hazardous charges refer to moving violations, while non-hazardous charges refer to non-moving or equipment violations. In 2022, Council approved 8 additional radar trailers, which have been deployed 69 times in every precinct across the city. The trailers are placed based on information received through the traffic hotline, internal communication, as well as community and council concerns. The data provided helps determine if greater attention needs to be given to resolve the traffic issue. Trailers are typically placed alongside the roadway in the area of concern that will give us the best data to determine how severe the issue might be, as well as the time of day it's occurring. So with our enforcement strategy, we need to be able to gauge the effectiveness of our efforts and determine if an adjustment in strategy is necessary. The collision data shows that overall collisions have started to be reduced across the city since the traffic unit put a greater emphasis on enforcement. Collisions have trended on average from 2,400 per month, 2,480 per month in 2021 to 2,350 per month in 2022, and now in 23 they've been on average of approximately 2,214 per month. We've also seen a reduction in fatal collisions overall. However, there has been a slight increase in serious injury collisions. With the greater enforcement effort, citations have increased as well from an average of 3,200 per month to now an average of almost 3,900 per month. This last page provides an overview of enforcement data for the traffic unit year to date through September 11th of this year. And with that, I'll turn over to Director Knudsen.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee. Here to provide an update a little bit on what we've been doing over the summer regards to automated enforcement. Next slide. So as you're well aware, back in June, we were at a City Council policy meeting to give an update on our yellow light timing study. That was something we had been working on over about last 6 months previous to that. It was a partnership we had with University of Arizona, and it's going to click through. Just go ahead and click through. Thank you. And with that University of Arizona partnership, we were looking at 12 intersections around the city where we were adjusting yellow light timing and extending it to be able to see what the safety impact and the driver behavior impact was of those extended yellow lights. We saw up to a 60% reduction in red light running incidents at those intersections, and based on that, we got council direction to move forward over a 3-year period to adjust our 1,200 traffic signals to extend the yellow light timing on there. As part of that effort, or that motion as well, council gave us direction to do some investigation and research over the summer on enforcement options for automated enforcement to be able to assist the police department in doing some better enforcement on the roadways based on the challenges that the police department has on staffing, be able to do those kind of things. So, next slide. So a little bit about the history of the program here in City of Phoenix. Even though we don't have a current automated enforcement program, we did have a program beginning in 2001. It started out with 10 intersections and 2 mobile speed vans. And over the next 18 years that we had the program, we had 3 different vendors under contract. During that time, we had 10 to 12 intersections that we were using for red light running cameras, and we also expanded our speed vehicles from 2 to 8, and mostly those vehicles were used in school zones to be able to enforce school zone speed limits. In 2019, the program ended. It actually had a contract that expired in December 31st of 2019. At that time, we were considering a new solicitation and an expansion of the program, but in January of 2020, the council did not have a consensus on moving forward with the program, so it ended. Then, when you look at red light running crash statistics that we've seen, what I would kind of put this is, if you look across the United States, in 2020 alone, we had greater than 2 fatalities a day attributed to red light running. That equates across the country over a year, 928 fatalities and over 116,000 injuries related to red light running incidents. Here locally, we looked at a 7-year span of that, 2014 to 2021. We had 144 fatalities on the roadway that was attributed to red light running incidents and nearly 11,000 injuries. So the red light running enforcement crash analysis that we kind of did on those 12 intersections that we had running in 2019, we looked at a before and after study, looking at the 3 years before we had installed those, and then also the 3 years after that, that they were installed. And what we saw at those 12 intersections was nearly a 31% reduction in red light running crashes in all directions. And then those cameras don't always monitor all directions of travel, but in the directions of travel they were monitoring, we saw a 57% reduction in red light running crashes. At the same time, what we saw across the city, trend-wise, is we actually saw an increase in collisions, nearly 15% across the city, and nearly a 4% increase in injuries and fatalities during that same time. Next slide. So when we're looking at the automated enforcement, we looked across the country, but we also looked here locally, and we saw what other cities are doing with automated enforcement. We specifically looked at 4 cities: Chandler, Mesa, Scottsdale, and Paradise Valley. We also looked at the different types of enforcement on an automated basis that they were using, between red light running, speed on green, fixed mid-block speed, portable speed towers, and mobile speed vehicles. So you see the numbers that they are using in their own cities, and they're much smaller cities than Phoenix, and so we have 1,200 signalized intersections in the city of Phoenix, and I'm going to go through a little more detailed analysis on each of these types of enforcement that are used there. Next slide. So the program options, as I kind of outlined before, you've got 5 different types of, five different types of vehicles that are typically used for automated enforcement programs. You see red light running, speed on green, fixed mid-block speed, portable speed towers, and mobile speed vehicles. I'm going to go through those each individually on the next slides. So red light running, you see here, next slide. Red light running you see here, this is cameras that are installed at intersections to be able to deter and enforce red light running behavior. These are what people most think of in common when you talk about red light running cameras. But it is possible with these cameras to monitor multiple different directions of travel, as well as different movements that happen at the intersection, left turns, right turns, through movements. Next slide. The next one that we have here is speed on green, and this is one that can be used in conjunction with a red light running camera at an intersection or at other locations. But the intent here is to be able to capture speed of vehicles that are going through that area, in this case in an intersection. And typically there is a buffer between the speed limit and what is enforced. And sometimes that's set at a threshold speed that may be 10 or 11 miles per hour over this posted speed limit. Next one we have is fixed mid-block speed. So where you have some of that enforcement happening at intersections, you also have roadway corridors, and one I think of in particular is Greenway Parkway, where you have a lot of speeding going on that roadway, and this is an opportunity to be able to enforce speed at a mid-block area where you might have a corridor that has higher than average speeding going on. And same thing holds there, as you would potentially have a buffer or a threshold between the speed limit and what is enforced. The next one we have here is portable speed towers, and this is something is more movable. Rather than just having it in one location, you can move it at different locations based on what you're maybe observing in trends or hot spots that might be where you see higher than normal incidents of speeding going on. Then you also have mobile speed vehicles. That's the next one up here. And this is the one similar to the one you see the City of Phoenix bird on the vehicle here. That's from the previous program of vehicles that were used around school zones to be able to enforce the 15-mile-an-hour speed limits. And these are ones that can obviously easily be moved around, not just in school zones, but other areas along roadway corridors that might have speeding issues. Next slide. Then when you talk about intersection evaluation methodology, and I know that was a concern of council back in 2019 and 2020 when they were considering whether to extend or allow the previous program to expire. And I think that one thing that we would put through, and you can kind of click through there, is when we're looking at intersection evaluation methodology, I think the first thing and foremost is to make sure that we are using a data-based approach. We want to use data to be able to determine where we have higher than normal incidents of red light running or even crashes or serious injuries and fatalities that are resulting from red light running incidents. And so we would look at intersection evaluation methodology that would not just look at that up front before we would install some monitoring equipment, but also to see what the impact of that monitoring equipment has on driver behavior and violations of red light running or potentially speed in those cases. But there's different factors you can use in looking at these, but these are just some of them: red light running crashes, serious injuries, fatalities, and also pedestrian crashes that might be resulting from red light running. Next slide. And one of the big questions also becomes about how do you go about, as a city, go about doing this if we were going to restart a program here. There are different pricing models as we looked out in the industry, and I'm going to briefly kind of go through those. If you look at, there's one called revenue share, and that's essentially where the city has no capital outlay, no money attached to it, and so the amount of each citation that may come out of a violation is split on a percentage basis between the vendor that provides that equipment. And I should mention, when the vendor provides that equipment, they're not just providing the installation cost, they're also operating and maintaining that, so that there's no cost on the city other than what state requires us to do when it comes to validating any citations that come out of automated enforcement program. So there is still city time expenditures to be able to monitor and administer the program, but the majority of the cost, the equipment, operating and such, that is borne by the vendor. So in the first case, the revenue share, that's just a split between the revenue of the citations between the city and the vendor, and that is for the vendor to be able to recover the cost of the capital outlay and the operating and maintenance costs for those pieces of equipment. The subscription is where a model where you actually, the city would then pay a lease fee or a monthly fee for the use of those cameras. We would not own the cameras, but we would pay that fee to the vendor, and then any citation revenue that came out of that would be with the city, would stay with the city. And then you have the hybrid model, which is kind of a split between the two, where still you don't have any capital outlay by the city, but we would either pay a fee to the vendor or split the cost, and in a combination with splitting the cost or revenue that comes, or splitting the revenue that comes back from those citations as well. So there's options of how you look at it. I put the owner part at the end just to let you know each one of these camera systems are about $150,000 to $200,000 each to be able to install, and that could vary depending on the type of equipment and monitoring you're doing at an intersection or a location. But it would require a significant outlay from the city to be able to own and operate the equipment. And when we've looked at our research, there are some cities that have done that, but most who have done that are transitioning away from that model to more one of the other ones, either revenue share, subscription, or the hybrid model. Slide. So we're kind of getting near wrapping up the discussion here. What we're looking for, and I should mention that we're going to be going to the Transportation Subcommittee in 2 weeks from today and doing a kind of a deeper dive on this topic as well, but obviously we want to hear from the Public Safety and Justice Subcommittee members about your thoughts or your feelings about this program. It's not something that we have for action right now, but we want to, as we're looking to potentially consider and heeding the council's direction to research on this, we want to make sure we hear from you what your concerns are. And when you look at this, obviously the feedback we're looking for as a staff is what do you feel about automated enforcement? Is that something we want to pursue? And then automated enforcement options. And we talk about automated enforcement, that kind of talks about some of the things we were mentioning about how many different locations do we want to do. We had 12 before, 12 locations, for example. We have 1,200 signals. That's 1% of our intersections. So is it something we want, if we want to do something like this, do we want to have a larger presence of cameras? How do we want to site those cameras or that equipment, and what methodology we would use, what type of contracting options we would want to go through and do it? There's a lot of things to consider, and we can go in different directions as whatever the council directs us to. But we would love to hear your input and feedback on that. So these are just some of the potential discussion topics today if the subcommittee would like to entertain those. And the next step is, as I mentioned before, the next slide is just our presentation in 2 weeks to the TIPS subcommittee.
Thank you so much. Councilman Robinson.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam Chair. Keeney, thank you for the presentation. Sean, thank you. You guys did a great job with it. The question I have, and it's something, Keeney, you said at the very end with regard to the next steps, you're going to take a deeper dive with the TIP subcommittee. Can we do the same thing here for this subcommittee? Simply because I would think that Public Safety and Justice Subcommittee should have as much of a say as to how we move forward, or at least the recommendation we're going to make to the full council. So I would request, Madam Chair, that whatever is presented to TIP with regard to options or however we want to move forward with that, it comes to this subcommittee as well. I think that's simply because I think this is what we're going to need to do in light of our officer shortage. And Sean, when you were going through the number of motor officers that we have and such, and they're doing a great job, I take my hat off to them, but it's not enough. I mean, every day I get a notification, it seems like every day, on a traffic fatality, and what we know is that we have to change driver behavior. And we do that when people know there are repercussions for their actions. So for all of those reasons, I'm hopeful that this subcommittee will have an equal say, or as much to say with regard to future options with regard to this whole program.
So, Madam Chair, Councilman Robinson, I wanted to clarify that we understand that both Public Safety and Justice and the Transportation, Infrastructure, and Planning subcommittees are both interested in this topic. And I don't think we're not necessarily going to be providing a recommendation at the TIP subcommittee in a couple of weeks. It's really the same kind of, we're just going to go through a few more slides and talk a little bit more about the research and information we've gathered on the program, and maybe have the same kind of conversation where we're getting feedback. Ultimately, this is something that is not necessarily going to be decided at the subcommittee level. I would assume that it would be something that the full council would want to hear. But there's different ways that we can formulate recommendations going forward. But we kind of want to, because we have different options, whether we're talking about contract options, the number of how pervasive this we would like to go, what types of enforcement we want to do, speed versus red light running versus school zone. There's a lot of different options on the table, and so we would like to be able to narrow that down if we're going to move forward with a program like that, if that's the council would like to do.
Councilman Waring?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So we had 10 to 12 cameras at intersections. You mentioned the same number, I think 12 for Paradise Valley. Isn't that every intersection Paradise Valley has that has a light?
Madam Chair, Councilman Waring, I'm not sure exact number that Paradise Valley has, but they do have a strong enforcement on an automated basis and through that, and I think they have a reputation for it as well. Anybody, I mean, I tend not to drive through Paradise Valley, but not because of that. But I mean,
I do, so I can tell you if they have more than 12 intersections that have lights, I'd like to know where they are. I think they also, if you check, put license plate readers on their corners. So if you're driving through Paradise Valley, and remember, these aren't really cameras, or you should add another word, it's video, right? They send you a picture, but every time you walk through, drive through anywhere in Paradise Valley, you're being videotaped, and they're reading your license plate. At what point, and nothing against the sister city, you know, obviously their councils have decided in years past this is what they want to do, but that really, that bothers me a little bit. Just the premise that a government agency or their surrogates are collecting video and where you're going at all times, basically, because it's pretty hard to drive very far without going through an intersection. That's tracking like you might expect from 1984 or something like that. So that's concerning to me. I could be wrong about the license plate readers, but I was actually kind of lost touch with him, but I think the mayor, who was mayor at the time, told me about it, so I think I'm right about that. But you can check. That's a little concerning. So let's just assume that's 100% of their intersections. How many intersections with street lights, or I guess traffic lights, do we have?
So, Madam Chair, Councilman Waring, I think how we would look to approach this, I think, as I mentioned, we would want this to be data-based. So if we're using equipment to, and I should back up, I meant to mention it during the presentation, is back in January when we were first talking about the yellow light timing study, Council provided direction to us to be able to install similar equipment at other intersections that were deemed some of our most dangerous intersections. There's a Maricopa Association of Governments list of that. So we're in the process of installing that equipment, and that equipment is not going to be red light running camera equipment, but it's equipment that detects what's going on at an intersection where you can see what kind of safety issues are going on there, and that would give us the ability to be able to see where we have these issues. So and be very clear, from a street transportation department perspective, I'm not looking about the revenues. I mean, a lot of people make it about that. I'm looking about what makes our streets safer. When the council unanimously adopted the Vision Zero Road Safety Action Plan, that was something we took as, hey, we need to look for everything we can to be able to make our streets safer. And so when we're looking at this program, if whatever revenue we generate, I would want to be able to invest that into other safety improvements on our roadways. How do we make our roadways safer? Not something else. And so I don't look at it from a revenue perspective. I look at it from what we do to address safety. But the number of intersections would be really based on where we have the issues and where we have the problems.
Madam Chair, I don't think I mentioned revenue at all. I wasn't going, I zig where others zag, Keeney, so sorry about that. Like just how many intersections, not how many intersections we might pick for this. Like, isn't it about 1,100 that have 4 lights?
Sorry. Yes, we have 1,200 intersections that are signalized. I think when we were looking at this, a few years ago and talking about what would be a potential increase, and I don't think you go from one day to one to the next, but I think how you really change driver behavior and going to what Councilman Robinson was talking about, I think if you got to somewhere like 10%, so maybe we're at 120 locations, but that would be deemed on data. Where do we have issues?
So I guess, Madam Chair, I don't mean to cut you off. So before we had 10, or we'll just say 12 for simplicity's sake, out of 1,200, so 1%, right? So, but really, sorry, a drop in the bucket. We didn't put them, despite protestations to the contrary, they were not located in the most dangerous intersections. I remember the discussion in 2019, and I think the other three members up here weren't here for that discussion. Oh, you were here, Betty? I'm sorry, I apologize. Faulty memory of old age, I apologize. So 2 of the 4 weren't here, although Kevin would probably be cognizant of a lot of this just from his old job. But, so we had 1%, and we got rid of it because they weren't putting them in the most dangerous intersections, and they weren't moving around, which I think that was also supposed to be part of it. And the tickets were going, at least what some council members said, were going in a kind of a, maybe discriminatory isn't the word, but it was affecting people different ways based on ethnicity, based on where they lived in the city. And that was an issue. So on a bipartisan vote, we got rid of this program. I voted to get rid of it. I would argue that bumping it up to 120 still wouldn't make a difference. If you're going to do it, then you might as well do it at every intersection. And see my comments earlier about Paradise Valley. At what point is that a creepy invasion of everybody's privacy? Because you're going to be tracking people, really at that point, all through Paradise Valley and all across Phoenix. So I know you're not suggesting that, but picking and choosing kind of the winners and losers of intersections doesn't make sense. Keeping them in static locations didn't work the last time because people change their behavior at the one intersection where they know that it is, but then, you know, do whatever they want at the rest of the intersections. What I've noticed as someone who drives 1 million miles a year is it's the loss of police officers on the street. I had the most exciting thing that'll happen to me all week was seeing a motor officer on a motorcycle with a radar camera on Cactus yesterday morning. That's, I think, the second or third time I've seen it. You know, they're not always in the same place. They're at different spots. That's what's going to make a difference. Mobile officers out on the streets. Do you have any safety data about what's happened since we've gone from whatever it was, I don't have it right in front of me, 130 officers or whatever. I think the low was 34. You're saying we now have 43, and I know we tried to build that up. There's got to be statistics about that, right? Because people change their behavior because they know an officer isn't going to be around the corner, potentially, like they used to think. That used to be a thing. You never hear that anymore because they know it's not going to happen. The odds that you run into one of our officers in the 5,000 miles of streets we have is, you know, pretty non-existent when you only have 34 of them out there. We should be focusing on that. I think that's going to be a lot more effective than picking 10%, keeping in mind we got rid of a program that had 12, so I don't know why just a couple years later it makes sense to increase that 10 times. I find that that's an odd track. So I'd like to hear more about what we're doing to get more officers out on the streets who can move around, sit in different spots, and catch people who are breaking the law. Also, you're not doing anything on the long straightaways, and I didn't see any statistics about how many fatalities are there in Phoenix as a whole, what percentage are at the red lights, and what percentage are at all the other places that aren't red lights. Because these cameras wouldn't do anything about that. People could still race up to red lights. I see them do it all the time, switching in and out of traffic and so forth, but they're not going to do that if they think there's a potential for an officer to be sitting there. A static camera, they'll just slow down at the camera and then do whatever they want as soon as they get by it. So maybe that's something for the chief to respond to, because I'm curious what the answer is.
Madam Chair, Councilman Waring, there's no doubt that having a sworn officer on the street provides exceptional level of service when it comes to traffic safety. But I think when you're looking at technology, it provides a force multiplier. Knowing that we can't be everywhere all at once, by adding technology to the equation, it just increases our outreach in terms of what we're able to provide in terms of putting those officers in the right places and then being able to utilize them in those high-risk areas where we're seeing greater collisions or greater concerns from the community.
So, Madam Chair, I did think I asked, so do we see more accidents on everywhere else that's not an intersection or at the intersections? I don't know the answer. I'm curious what the answer is.
Madam Chair, Councilman Waring, I don't have that data in front of me. That's something that we could get to you. But I would say that intersections and long stretches of roadways alike, we see serious injuries, collisions. I couldn't say it's 50-50 or 30-70 or what the percentages were, but we see them at various locations, not always just in the intersections.
Right. I mean, I thought I had the data in here about accidents. I think it was fatals or injury accidents at intersections. I thought the number was 43, but I can't remember what page it's on, unless you remember, Ann.
Go ahead.
But surely, just knowing the statistics statewide like I do, I gotta believe it's dramatically more accidents happen in Phoenix that are injuries or fatals that aren't at intersections. And I don't really hear much to address that. I think from memory we've gone from 34 motor officers up to 43, so I guess that's progress given the shortages the department has. But I really think focusing on that above all things would probably make a lot of sense. The issues that were brought up in 2019 will remain. If you put the lights that you're talking about, if you put 120 lights at the most dangerous intersections, you're probably not going to, I think maybe Keeney, this is again from memory, I've seen the MAG list, maybe you're going to put 1 or 2 in District 2. You're going to be putting pretty much all of them in the central or southern part of the city, or the western part is my guess. And the issues that were brought up a few years ago by some of my either then colleagues, I don't remember if Betty said anything about it, but colleagues maybe are no longer here or aren't on this committee, are going to remain. You're going to be given a disproportionate amount of tickets to people who might struggle harder to pay for them, at least that's what we were told at the time, and you're probably not going to give a whole lot of tickets in North Phoenix. So if that was an issue a few years ago, I don't know why it wouldn't be an issue going forward. And it's going to be much more of an issue if you increase the cameras by 10 times. Food for thought.
Madam Chair, Councilman Waring, if I may, talking about automated enforcement, that is one tool in our toolbox potentially to address road safety. When you talk about injuries, serious injuries, fatalities, with the Road Safety Action Plan the Council adopted and we're implementing, everything is based on our high injury network. That high injury network is a heat map that shows where are the serious injuries and fatalities happening. It doesn't make sense for me to put a safety investment or a monitoring tool, something like this, in a place where we don't have incidents. And so when we're looking at investments for implementing our Road Safety Action Plan, we're looking for where those high injury network incidents are. Where do we have the higher number of serious injuries and fatalities on our roadways happening, and why are they happening? Are they happening at intersections, or are they happening in roadway corridors? And when I say one tool, that this is just one way to be able to address some of the safety issues on our roadways. There are plenty of other things that we are doing around the city using that high injury network to target our investments. And going back to what we see is the major cause of serious injury fatalities out there, and this is from our reviewing the reports that come from the police department, is speed and failure to yield. Those are the main reasons why people are getting injured and dying on our roadways. And failure to yield typically happens either at an intersection or where people are making turns along a roadway corridor, and speed happens throughout a corridor or even at the intersections. So those are the two main causes of serious injuries and fatalities on our roadways.
Madam Chair, if I could just follow up on that. So this harkens to a different discussion we've had, all stems from the shortage of officers. So it's always been a sort of a burr in my saddle that we take officers from District 2, where the crime rate is lower, and we move them, understandably, when you're short officers, to where the crime rate is higher. But of course, explaining it to my constituents who are like, but our crime rate isn't 0. We could be the victim of crimes or some terrible tragedy or something, and now we've got this huge area left largely undefended. We're just hoping everybody behaves appropriately because we've moved officers to light rail, as we discussed last month, or we're moving them someplace where the crime rate is, granted, dramatically higher. If you believe that the red light cameras are an incredibly great safety tool, and you're telling me that we're going to put in 12 of them or 120 of them, and basically none of them are going to benefit my constituents, they're all going to go somewhere else, even though we still have accidents in District 2 last time I checked, and then citizens in my district are expected to pay for that. Can you see why that doesn't always sit that well? in either of those scenarios, there's a bigger problem somewhere else in the city, so we're going to send the resources that you are providing a disproportionate amount of the revenue to cover somewhere else, and you're kind of left on your own. I'm not saying either I or my district are hankering for more lights, but again, it just seems like another example where we're being punished for not having worse statistics, and I think that's wrong too. But I do understand, it's not a criticism, I think it's understood. I have the utmost respect for Keeney, and I know the chief knows his business and has a very intractable problem to deal with. But it is noticed by people, including me, and it's not fair. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Waring. Councilwoman Guardado.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Everything that Councilman Waring said, yes, I was definitely here in 2019 when we were having those discussions. And I think I've been one of the biggest cheerleaders when it comes to Vision Zero. When it comes to safety, I remember doing a ton of meetings with you, Keeney, and with your staff out in Maryville with the Estrella Supermoms on how to reduce speed. What were the different things that we could do? What are the different things that we could work on together? And we've done a lot, right? I think this is one group that has taken the time to educate their neighbors about what it means when you speed. So for me, agreeing with a lot of what Councilman Waring just said, I just think that when we talk about Vision Zero and when we spoke about Vision Zero, Keeney, the first thing I asked you when I was going to support that, I asked you, does this include red light cameras? And you guys told me no, that wasn't the plan for Vision Zero. And in the packet then, it's nowhere in there, right? That part of Vision Zero was red light cameras. And for me, I want to see us really implement Vision Zero and implement everything that we have said, that we put money towards to already to reduce all of these fatalities, right? When we talk about speed and failure to stop and to yield, that has nothing to do with the red light cameras. That, in my opinion, has to do with our infrastructure. When you have a road that's open, where you can run 45, 50, 55 miles an hour without getting a ticket, like people are going to do it whether there's a red light camera or not. So for me, how is it that we can really invest in infrastructure and the medians that we need to provide in a lot of these intersections? And yes, I mean, we in District 5, the camera we have in District 5 is at 53rd Avenue and Indian School. And I think we all saw that video that went viral on social media where a car intersected another car so that they wouldn't kill that family. And that red light camera did not stop that person from running that red light. And the family was about to die. And if it wasn't for this other car that stopped it, that would have been an issue. In that intersection, we went from 3.7 before the privatized cameras to 2.3 after. And this change, made very minimal changes into that intersection. And, and I'm not gonna get started again on the equity issue that we talked about 4 years ago, the lack of people being able to pay for these tickets. I mean, Councilman Waring already said it also, I'm not gonna repeat it, but that's a big problem for me as well. And more importantly, we know that safer streets are normally the result of high yielding investments in infrastructure. I'm going to continue to say that. It's not that I don't believe that our streets should be safe. It's not that I think that, that people should be speeding. I think that we need to find real solutions. It's kind of the same thing what I said last month when we talked about security on the light rail. Like, we need real solutions, not just a plan on a piece of paper. And this one's worse because the only thing that we're going to do by continuing with this plan is that we're just going to make other intersections a lot more unsafe because people will go around them, right? People will go around these intersections. They will take a different turn. I just really think that we should look at what other cities are doing. And yes, it costs money, right? If we look at the type of infrastructure that other cities and other states are doing to reduce these type of fatalities, they all cost money. And I think this is very old school thinking. Maybe this worked 20 years ago, 30 years ago, when the city wasn't 1.7 million people. There's a lot of people in the city of Phoenix, and I think everything needs different solutions. And I just think, at least for District 5, installing these cameras again, it didn't work then. The only thing it did, it just put more pressure on my constituents. It didn't work then, and I don't believe that it's gonna work now. So I could never be supportive of these red light cameras, but I would enjoy in having a conversation, and maybe you coming back, Kini, and or someone coming back to us and talking to us about how is Vision Zero going, how is the implementation of that happening, and what are the next steps on that plan, because I believe that plan is what's really going to make the difference here. Thank you, Chairwoman.
Thank you, Councilwoman Guardado. Thank you both for being here. I appreciate you presenting it to this committee as well as, again, before the TIP in a couple weeks. Changing behavior is important, and after listening to my fellow committee members and council members, having more officers will definitely help. If we could have more officers, we would. We will talk more about that shortly, about the impediment to that. And if we have more officers that can write more tickets because we put them at intersections where we know the data shows that there are more accidents, or on streets that have more speeding, I believe we could have potentially the same equity conversation. If we let data drive this conversation, then we would put tools that would be a force multiplier for our officers in places where we need them. We need behavior to change. No less than 3 or 4 times in the last 24 hours, albeit on the I-17, which I know is not in the control of the police department, there were at least a half a dozen people going over 100 miles per hour, weaving in and out of traffic. And while they might not go quite that fast on our streets, they are going fast, and they are running red lights. And people are changing their behavior to try to avoid from being killed. I can't tell you how many constituents I speak to who no longer enter the intersection when the light turns green immediately. Some wait so long that they are being honked at by the people behind them to ensure the intersections are safe. I support Vision Zero. I support having more officers, but we all know that I support making sure that our officers, our city staff, whatever department that may be, has all the tools available to them to make sure that our constituents and our visitors are safe while they're in our city. And I think that if we can save a life by using additional tools, we should do that. I know that I spoke to somebody who was around 20 years ago when the state legislature and folks talked about red light running cameras. This is not a revenue generator. This should either be net neutral to the city, or if there are some kind of positive impact to revenue, those should be directed back into making our streets safer for walkers, for bikers, for people who are driving in their cars. The city is very different. Downtown, there's a lot more walking and micromobility. In my district, in Councilman Waring's district, it's much more car-centric. We need to be able to address all of those things with as many tools as possibly available to us, especially given our hiring crisis and I'm going to say, and retirement crisis with the police department. So I appreciate you both being here. I look forward to more information. I do want to note that Councilman Waring asked for additional data on accidents so that they're not just red light running at intersections. We'd like to please send to the whole committee information about collisions across, all collisions, and break them down in a way that we could evaluate that data, intersections, long stretches of road, if that's possible. Okay. Thank you so much for being here today. We look forward to hearing more, maybe at a future policy meeting, if that's the direction it takes. All right. And I don't want to forget to say that although Councilwoman Guardado kind of referred to it, this was probably the last time we don't get to see you very often, Director Knudsen in PSJ, but you'll be retiring later this month and moving on to a new adventure. So thank you for your service to the City of Phoenix, and best of luck in your new adventure.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Right, thank you both. All right, our next item is the Block Watch Grant Program. Assistant Chief Charmaine Osborne is with us, as well as our Neighborhood Services Department Director, Spencer Self, and our Streets Assistant Director, Jesse Duarte. Did I get that right?
Morning, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee. I'm Assistant Chief Charmaine Osborne.
Is your microphone on?
It shows it is. Maybe
they gave you a little bit more volume. That's better. Thank you.
Start again. Good morning, Chairwoman O'Brien and members of the subcommittee. I'm Assistant Chief Charmaine Osborne. This will be a group presentation, as you said. I have accompanied with me as Neighborhood Services Director Spencer Self and Streets and Transportation Deputy Director Jesse Duarte. I'll give you a little bit of overview on the Block Watch Grant Program. In October of 1993, voters approved Proposition 301, which was known as the Neighborhood Protection Ordinance. In April of 1994, the Council approved the Neighborhood Block Watch Grant Oversight Committee. That is comprised of 2 members from the City of Phoenix from each district that represent the board. The application process is redone every year, or every other year, basically. So it was in 2022, it was approved for a 2-year period. The goal of the Block Watch grants are to enhance safety and quality of life for citizens and neighborhoods through doing innovative programs. They are there for detecting and deterring crime, encouraging citizens to have pride in their neighborhood with such events as GAIN, which we will see this month. Applicant eligibility remains the same because the grant was approved last year. This year's process will open on November 1st, and applications must all be submitted by December 7th. The scoring criteria remains the same on our application guide, with the maximum grant being of $15,000. The reason this is a group presentation today goes back to a request that was made at the May 10th, 2023 Public Safety and Justice Subcommittee meeting. At that meeting, the board members asked for staff to evaluate the use of Block Watch funds for additional public safety needs. Assistant City Manager Lori Bays, along with Budget and Research, members of our respective departments' legal teams, and the group seated here, met to evaluate this request. They came up with the following 3 recommendations as a proposal for the subcommittee to review. As shown on the slide, our 3 proposals are to increase funding for the gated alley program, increase funding to gate open culverts and wash areas, and increase no trespassing signage. I'll now relinquish my role and have Director Spencer.
Thank you, Chief Osborne. Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, the Early Gated Alley program launched in 2017 in the Royal Palm and Sunny Slope neighborhoods due to neighborhood concerns regarding safety and as a way to help reduce illegal dumping, graffiti, and other issues that can occur in alleys. This early pilot relied on neighborhood funding, neighborhoods to fund the gates themselves, which quickly showed inequities in what neighborhoods were able to take advantage of that program. In March of 2020, the City Council allocated $400,000 to grow the pilot program by creating a grant program to fund more alley segments across the city. The team established gate standards and a process for applications to help provide more access for the community. With the overwhelming support for the expanded program, the City Council chose to make the program permanent, and last year allocated $500,000 from the general fund, and this year increased that allocation by an additional $352,000 for a total of $852,000. Those funds are anticipated to be able to fund approximately 77 alley segments this year at $11,000 per alley segment. And as of this meeting, we've already received 71 requests, which means we've almost received our maximum request in the first quarter of the fiscal year. Unfortunately, that also means that without additional funding, we will soon have to hold new requests until next fiscal year, which is why we're recommending allocating $750,000 of Block Watch funds to allow us to continue the program this year with a focus on public safety. And the approach we intend to take with the Block Watch funding would be to work with our partner departments in police, public works, streets, and others to identify problem alleys, which would be recommended for gating due to issues related to violent crime, property crime, drug use, and encampments. However, throughout the program's history, we've prioritized our community in determining where new gates will be installed, and these funds will be no exception. That means we will put more value on concerns raised by the community as we evaluate the sections of alley segments to gate with these funds. I'll now turn the presentation over to Deputy Street Transportation Director Jesse Duarte to discuss their needs regarding washes.
Thank you, Spencer. Morning, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee. I am going to talk about the gated wash program. One of the things that we looked at is public concerns from our residents around the washes that are adjacent to the washes within the culverts. The main concern that they are looking at is encampments that we keep seeing within the culverts themselves. There is illegal dumping, but those are created a lot through the encampments, and creates a lot of trash and debris within the area. The areas what we did, we worked with our CARES program. We were able to identify through the CARES program how many times we went to these areas that were a high area of concerns for wash maintenance, right? The areas were Greenway Wash, which is 19th Avenue to Cave Creek Road on Greenway Road. The next one was Cave Creek Wash, which is 7th Avenue and Bell Road to 11th Avenue and Sandra Terrace. And the last one is a scattered wash between 35th Avenue to Deer Valley Road. For those areas, we found that we had a lot of cases coming through the CARES program for cleanups. One of the things that we did do is our director, Kenny Knudsen, was able to work with the Stormwater Committee to get us funding for stormwater gates over off of these areas, over off of John Cabot. It's on Cave Creek Road and John Cabot Roads where these gates are located. I believe Councilman Waring is well aware of these gates. We were able to get about $78,000. They roughly ran about just under $20,000 per gate. These gates are situated as a barn-style type gate where when we see a storm coming, we know a storm's coming, we're going to be able to go and open the gates to impede the flow of water. The other thing that we've noticed that we've looked at as well is that we did in the legislature, it was about $60,000. We were able to update our numbers. Just in the first quarter alone, in cleaning out these washes, we've utilized about $47,000 to clean these areas out. So this is going to be a big help for us. And just another number, we have about 29 and a half miles of washes throughout the city itself right now. Now we'll talk about no trespassing signs. Well, these are basically for all types of signs that we're looking for. But one of the things that we do and we want to do is we always lead with services when we look at homelessness out there. And one of the things is that happens is that when we go through the process of trying to help the homeless to remove them out of the culverts, the ones that don't accept services, we still get them to move. But the problem happens is that when a week or two go by, they end up going back. These trespassing signs will help us to help PD enforce the area. And with that, I'll hand it back over. Thank you.
Madam Chair and members of the board, staff requests that Public Safety and Justice Subcommittee approve a recommendation to City Council to appropriate $2.2 million from the Block Watch Fund to include allocating up to $750,000 for the Gated Alley program, $1.2 million for the Gated Wash program, and up to $200,000 for additional signage. With that, we'll answer any questions.
Thank you so much. Councilman Waring has some questions.
So I've harped a lot on the gated washes and the underpasses, and we were happy to finally get action. I will say I supported the Gated Alley pilot program, but again, you know, it's one of those things that we don't really have a lot of alleys in District 2. I actually personally have one, but there's nothing like to connect it to. It's plants and then, but it was an alley where they used to pick up the garbage. Some of my neighbors have the same thing, but we didn't get, you know, there's nothing to connect the gate to, so, you know, it's kind of an unworkable problem. We didn't really look into it that seriously anyway. But once again, you know, we're pouring money into something that's going to go to other parts of the city, not ours. But my request is that we spend an equal amount of money on the washes and the underpasses. So we finally took a long time. We were told we couldn't do it. We finally did the underpass just south of Bell that actually bridges underpasses, I guess, depending how you look at it, my district and Deb's district, districts 2 and 3, under Cave Creek Road. That lasted about a month, and somebody cut through it and went right back to doing whatever they were doing under there in the first place. As an aside, I will say this person or persons, I assume, is housing challenged. I'm not trying to be mean here, but you know what they had? The wherewithal to get to Home Depot or something, buy a hacksaw or a bolt cutters, and cut through city property to go someplace that was clearly marked no trespassing, and to emphasize the point, we finally put up a gate. That sounds like a crime to me. So at some point, again, this is someone who I guess can't pull a job application and go to work filling potholes or something for the city where you have benefits and health care. Just editorializing, but I did notice that they had the wherewithal to like do some serious property damage. So I hope you guys are using materials that they can't just cut through literally within a month. We had the same issue at Tatum, south of Tatum Highlands. There was a whole family, I guess, living under there a couple of years ago. The HOA president didn't know who to call, so I knocked on his door one day and he offered that up. So that's one. The washes, we have no end of complaints. Frankly, our cleaning crews find dead bodies in the washes. That's really horrific. So anything you can do, but what I don't want to see is 95% of the money being spent in other parts of the city, 5% for what's a real problem that I've been harping about for years, and the one time I thought we had a success, it kind of lasted for a month. So serious gates that are impregnable, and a lot of them in pretty much every area that I mentioned. Deb had mentioned that same area under Cave Creek. I don't want to speak for her, but I think you'll find that she has some of the same issues, because we've got a different, I don't know if topography would be the word, but it's different than the makeup in some of the other districts, more central part of the city. But because of that, I sort of feel like we're getting cheated out of funding that is badly needed, because it's been a real issue that's really impacting the quality of life for residents in North Phoenix. Thank you.
Councilman Waring, I just want to clarify. The recommendation is for $1.25 million for the gated washes, to gate the washes, and then $750,000 for gated alleys.
But there are washes in other parts of the city. So again, I'm afraid that, well, we're just going to we're going to do a couple in each district. But if we don't have any alleys, all that funding is going to go somewhere else. I've given away alley funding in the past because we didn't have enough alley requests. We had a few, but we didn't have enough to like justify. So I know I gave some to Laura, and
you gave some to District 1, and,
yeah,
and we were very grateful. I
so
understand
again, that's money that's leaving.
Right.
Madam Chair, could we
Yes.
ask Mr. Duarte to please restate the 3 washes that we're recommending funding for?
Yes, please.
I guess I can clarify my requests. If I call and say there's an issue, I would hope you guys would just go out and gate it, whether it's on some list somewhere right now or not. Because this has been a thing for quite some time.
Madam Chair, Councilman Waring, the 3 washes that we've identified that we have a lot of call-outs to is a Greenway wash, which is 19th Avenue to Cave Creek Road on Greenway Road, Cave Creek wash, which is 7th Avenue and Bell Road to 11th Avenue and Sandra Terrace, and then the scattered wash, which is 35th Avenue to Deer Valley Road. And I do, Councilman Waring, I do remember when we put those gates up over off of Cave Creek and John Cabot Road, the first couple of weeks they did break them. But what we did is we actually installed a cover over the top of the lock, and we really haven't had any more issues since then with those gates.
Whatever you need to do, and I think I mentioned the one on Tatum and it's south of Remuda, if you're familiar with the street, but south of Tatum Highlands. That's one I definitely want done. And I'm sure I can come up with more. I don't have the list right in front of me, but okay. I know I've called in more than that. So really what I'm asking is anytime we have an issue, assume that I'm not just jerking your chain. I'm actually like, this is an issue that people are calling me about. That's how I know. So thank you.
So we want to ensure that washes that are in District 2 as well would be covered. Is that, that's what I hear Councilwoman Waring asking for. Unfortunately, I'm very visual and need a map. So you know, based on your addresses, I'm not sure if they aren't in, sounds like these are in District 3-ish. So that would mean no gated washes in District 2. Is that what I heard?
That's my point.
Okay.
Madam Chair, Councilor Waring, right now our staff is working on looking and identifying all the washes within each district. The other thing that we're working on as well is identifying the number of culverts that are in there, because when we looked at the 98 culverts, well, there's 49 culverts, but there's 2 entrances. That way it's 98 gates. But we're working on identifying all of them in each district.
Okay, so it's not limited to just these 3. Is that correct?
So, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, we are recommending that these 3, based on the number of requests received, are the first washes that are addressed. If we have additional funding past that point, we can address additional washes. We can also bring further recommendations back to the subcommittee and to the full council for additional block watch dollars beyond the $1.25 million to be used for additional washes in the future. But these are the ones that we're recommending addressing now based on the volume of calls that are coming in related to those particular washes.
So the entire $1.25 million is necessary to handle 98 gates for just these 3 washes.
That is correct.
So, Madam Chair, so this is, guys are looking at me like I don't know what I'm talking about. So there's a culvert or underpass or whatever on Tatum, south of Remuda. I brought that up a year or 2 ago, however long. I said this has been a problem in the past. I'd like it to be addressed. Now it seems like, well, we'll come back if there's any money left over. This is exactly what I'm talking about. And on the last item too, and last month with the light rail. You know, the taxpayers in District 2 are paying for this stuff too. They're calling with complaints, and I want to make sure that they're going to be heard. So to say all the money is already committed and not in District 2 is the genesis of my previous comment. And I think I was the first one, in fact, I know I am, and then another member who's not here started talking about it too. I brought it up with the gated alley pilot program. I said, that's not fair. You know, we're sending all this money out to other parts of the city, and really you're addressing the same problem. And honestly, I got basically stonewalled for about 2 years. It was extremely frustrating. And then finally it happened, and then it was cut through within a month. That was bad for morale, I'm not gonna lie. So I'm glad that that's been addressed. But I mean, that was a problem that went on for probably 2 or 3 years. And I kept hearing all the reasons we couldn't do it and how it was totally different than a gated alley. It's the same problem, people living someplace they're not supposed to be living and affecting the homeowners who live right next door. And filling it, and really filling the thing up with garbage too. The whole point is to have water run through, so the water couldn't get through because there was so much garbage. I also heard that, frankly, at one point, we couldn't gate it because then the garbage would all pile up and then no water would ever get through, so that was impossible. Well, now we're actually doing the gates that I was told at one point were impossible. So, you know, just my frustration on this particular issue is well earned. So I have an issue with, you know, this as being something I brought up. I think we're doing it in part because I brought it up, and we're going to do it someplace else. Thank you for your time. I appreciate you indulging me.
Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee, if I may, I apologize. It was our understanding that we were focusing on the Greenway and Cave Creek washes per our previous conversation, and that's why those were part of the recommendation today, in addition to the fact that those were substantiated with the call volume. What we could do, if the subcommittee would like us to, as you know, this would go forward to a formal council meeting for approval. We could make some modifications to the proposal to perhaps expand it to include that additional wash coverage for the formal proposal. It may include a little bit of additional funding required, or we could modify the number of gates that are completed along Greenway and Cave Creek to make that work within the existing funding, whatever your preference may be as a subcommittee. But if you would like us to do that, we can certainly do that before bringing it back to formal for final approval.
Okay, I do believe we'd like you to do that, to get more information. I know Councilwoman Guardado has some questions. I just want to verify, Greenway Wash, though, and those gates are in District 3. Is that correct?
Can you confirm that, Jesse? I apologize. I don't.
I believe so, yes. They're in District 3.
And Cave Creek Wash, that wash and those gates will be in District 3?
Correct.
And then Scattered Wash is?
Those are all come through District 3, the areas.
All three of these are in District 3, but based on call volume. So, all right, I'm going to go to Council. Are you good? Okay, Councilwoman Guardado, and we'll come back.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I mean, I think as everyone knows, I've been a big champion of this program. I think that, you know, on my first month when I first took office, I think Jesse and I took a tour throughout Maryville. And after the tour, he said that he was depressed just to see how the alleys were, and just like all the challenges that we saw inside those alleys. You know, that was a lot of what I heard when I was first running for office, you know, and, you know, a lot of the sentiment, you know, of all the resources always go to North Phoenix, all the resources never come to Maryville, and look at how our alleys look today because of the lack of resources in this part of town. So today I can proudly say, and I'm very happy that we've used the Gated Alley program to make people feel included in the West Side. Just in District 5, we've gated already 100, we have 120 alleys that are gated, or 120 segments, I think. I'm not exactly sure how, because Spencer's looking at me like, but we've done a lot of work, and I think it's really helped us to bring community together, to get neighbors to start talking to each other again. I think that's been one of the biggest successes of this program, that we finally were able to get neighbors to work together, to talk to each other, and to take ownership over their neighborhoods. We've implemented three new neighborhood associations because of this. So I think it's been a very successful program. I will continue to be a champion of this program, that we continue to do this work. We hear it from our school drivers on how many accidents happen in our alleys with our folks that are experiencing homelessness, and we hear of all the illegal activity that happens in the alleys, the illegal dumping. I mean, the list goes on. So we are very happy with the program. I can't wait to see the stats in terms of how this program is actually gonna help us to be able to, one, you know, give some relief to our police officers, two, for our school drivers to be able to move faster and being able to pick up the trash. And then three, to continue to bring communities together. I think this is what this program has really done for us in District 5, and shout out to Melina and to Emmanuel from my office who have gone out there when it's 120 degrees, and our students from Maryville High School that have also been out there collecting the signatures to making sure that we're able to make sure that this program is successful. Kudos to our staff, to Jeff and to Lori and to everyone for making this part of the budget. I think that was a huge win for neighbors last year, and I'm excited to be able to support this item and to be able to allocate. If you need a motion, Lori, to put in more money besides the 2.2 to really address the concerns that Councilman Waring has, I'd be more than happy to do that as well. Like, I think it's money that's that would be allocated and used for a very good cause. So I don't know if there's a different number and that you need from us to be able to meet those concerns. I get it. I understand what it feels like to feel that your district is not being addressed. I understand that. So I want to make sure that this program is inclusive for everyone on the council. So whatever it is that you need from us here right now to make everyone feel inclusive, let us know. But again, a big champion of this program, and hoping that as the years come, we're able to allocate a lot more money. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilwoman Guardado. Lori, do you want a number, or is it okay to make a motion that says to go forth and find us how many more washes we have in District 2 that we could gate, and help me out here?
Yeah, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee, what I would recommend is that you, if it is your desire, make a motion to move forward without a specific dollar amount, and then we will circle back with each of you with the recommended amount that we will be proposing to the full council to make sure that you are comfortable with that as part of your recommendation, and then we can put that on a formal council agenda for final approval. So, you can just say some dollar amount in addition to the recommendation to be inclusive of the wash that Councilman Waring referred to, and to install the gates
to include
there.
Other washes in the other districts.
Correct.
Okay, I have Councilman Waring who'd like to make
I'm trying to do this from memory without a map in front of me. I'd like to see how many calls for service have been at the wash that's right on the border with District 3 at 40th and T-Bird. I've certainly had a lot of calls about people living in there. They have found a dead body, at least one in there in recent times. I'm also curious about the wash by Horizon High School. So people ride, it's not just people living in there. They ride three-wheelers and stuff in there, and kind of at dangerous speeds is my understanding. So it kind of goes, so it would be, I think it would be east of Horizon High School. I think it would be off of 56th Street and Nisbet would be where it kind of crosses over one of our streets. If you're familiar, we've had lots of calls for service over there. Again, a little bit different issue. There is a wash, so Whitney would be north of T-Bird off of 40th Street. If you take Whitney east from 40th Street, I think that's the right name of the street. It dead ends into a wash. There have been issues back in there. The underpass, as I mentioned, at Tatum and Remuda, a whole family was living in there. I don't know if they are right this second, but they were, so it could happen again. That's dangerous and also not acceptable. And then one of the major ones is the wash. So it would be at like 2nd Street and Union Hills. We get a lot of complaints about that. I think that's probably the closest cross streets. I mean, that's 4 washes where I don't know how many times we've called people out for service, ask you guys to go out to either, clean up garbage that was left by homeless encampments or what have you. And I didn't hear any of those mentioned. And we've been calling about those for years and making us think about it for years. And then at underpass, which is more of a one-off, but still, I'd like to see it addressed. Based on what you're telling me price-wise, that's more.
Sorry, if you could just hold on.
That's actually more cost than we've already got in this program right now.
We could just pause for a second for the alert. Hopefully, we have all received our national alert that was just a test, and now we can be done and continue with the meeting.
So I think that's it, just off the top of my head. Christina, my office might have more of that, but that's something I'd like to address. I'm a little hard-pressed to believe that all these in other districts have had more calls for service than some of these I just mentioned.
So, good.
Yeah.
Good.
Good,
Okay.
thank you.
All right. Councilwoman Guardado, did you want to make a motion?
Yes, I would like to make a motion to approve the funding for the appropriation request for our gated alley program with no set amount, but that includes the $2.2 million, but being able to exceed that amount if needed, given the need that we have in the washes. Is that okay?
Madam Chair, I believe that's fine. I'm looking to our council to make sure there's no concerns. Jennifer, you're good with that? Okay.
Perfect. Do I have a second?
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second, and before we take that vote, I just want to clarify, sorry, I know we've asked you this a couple times, where are the gates going on scattered wash?
Madam Chair, I actually just got a text from one of my staff that the scattered wash is 35th Avenue to Deer Valley Road, which is in District 1.
Okay, I thought so, but I just wasn't quite sure. I know sometimes the washes extend through other districts. Wanted to verify that. I want to thank you all for listening to us and bringing back a robust program for additional gated alleys. I think that in District 1, where some of my residents were beneficiaries of a couple of Councilman Waring's, gate allocation. We always hear great things about what happens once we get to gate those alleys, and certainly takes less resources afterwards in cleaning and volunteer hours. I'm super excited about the gated washes portion because one, it's dangerous, and two, it's just a good thing for us to do to make sure that we're protecting people and keeping folks out of those areas. So, and thank you, Councilman Waring, for your comments today, and Councilwoman Guardado as well. Having said that, now, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you all for being here today to present on this. Look forward to the update. Our next item for information and discussion is our quarterly police hiring, recruitment, and attrition report, as well as an update on the 30 by 30 initiative. And for that, we have Assistant Chief Charmaine Osborne and then Commander Sarah Garza joining us.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of Subcommittee. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to present today on our hiring, recruitment, and attrition efforts with our police department. Our recruiting and hiring unit is led by Lieutenant Brian Hanania and his team, and we're proud to announce some of the great changes and successes that we've had in the last year. This timeline was presented by Assistant Chief Osborne in the last quarterly update, so I will not spend too much time on it. A lot of this proposed the foundation as to where we're at today. And here are some successes that we've had critical incidents to get us to some of the numbers that we're at today. In June of 2023, the council approved a marketing contract for recruiting efforts. In July, the police marketing team was implemented specifically for recruiting. In August, we held our first large 30 by 30 work group kickoff meeting. In August, we signed a marketing contract with Grand Canyon University. And in September of 2023, our new recruiting sergeant, Sergeant John Childress, started in his position. Our current staffing levels, we have 2,565 sworn positions that are filled, 560 sworn vacancies currently. Our averages for applications for police recruit per month remain steady compared to last year, as are lateral and reinstatement applications. This graph shows our attrition and hiring over the last 5 years. You can see a significant dip during COVID, where our recruiting efforts weren't able to go out into public and a lot of people were staying home. And you can see the progress in the red line in hiring. In 2023, our known attrition is currently at 135 officers. We're very proud to say that we're projecting hiring 180 officers. This is the first time, as you can see, in several years that our hiring outpaces our attrition, and we hope that in our next quarterly update we can have definitive data for you on that to celebrate these numbers. Some of the things that contributed to this were the retention bonus that was signed, the class and compensation study that we did, the drop extension, and things like that. I'd like to get into the regional demographics. This is what we consider our applicant pool. It's the Maricopa Association of Governments regional demographics. This study was done in 2021. It's the most recent data that is available to us. So this is our applicant pool. This includes some of our neighboring cities. And as one of our main goals in recruitment is to recruit from within our community, this is what we strive to maintain. Our goal is to be very reflective of our community. Here are our current sworn demographics. Some of the ranges of difference between this pie chart and the last one are that in the white category, we're about 14% over. The averages, Hispanic, we're about 10% under. For Black, we are about even. Asian, we're about 1% lower. And American Indian, we're about 1% lower as well. Our applicant demographics, 37% of our applicants are white, 35% are Hispanic, that's about 4 over. The MAG demographics, Black is 18, which is about 13% over MAG demographics. Asian is 1% lower, and the people that identify as other are about 3% over the applicant pool. This chart is reflective of the applicant and recruit demographics of who is actually hired. So you can see that there's 60% are white, 24% are Hispanic, which is about 11% lower. Black is almost 13%, which is about 5% lower. Asian 1.5, which is about 1.5%, lower. Well, some of our diversity recruitment efforts have proven to be successful. We recently, with the addition of our new recruiting sergeant, we've re-upped our relationship with the 1 in 10 initiative. The goals of the 1 in 10 initiative are for upskilling, hiring, and promoting 1 million Black individuals into family-sustaining careers. We feel that police recruit and police officer certainly fits this goal, and they agree with that. So we will continue to work with that initiative. Our recruiters are frequently attending multicultural events throughout the city, including events for Hispanic Heritage Month and a Native American Health Fair. Another thing that we will be doing to ensure our diversity recruitment efforts is reviewing the application and hiring process to ensure that it's equitable for everyone. We also have some process improvements to make the hiring process easier and more accessible to everyone. Our SWEAT program, our SWEAT with exercise and training, or effort and training, excuse me, is really successful. There's a photo here of one of our SWEAT programs. We offer it several times a week, and it assists applicants to pass the POPAT test, which is our physical test that we have. We're also updating the website with hiring process and job requirements to make sure that we're still transparent to our community, and it's very upfront as to what that process will look like. We have a multi-level file review, so the hiring decisions don't just fall on our background investigators who are very well trained. It goes, lots of times it goes to several different levels, including a sergeant, lieutenant, sometimes the commander, to review all of these files. We also have very active applicant engagement to ensure that our recruitment officers are engaging with our applicants and answering any questions they may have and helping them through the process. I'd also like to speak to the gender diversity of our sworn applicants and recruit hires. Clearly that we have a lot of work to do in this area. Currently sworn, we're at 14%. Our applicants year to date in 2023 are at 13% female, and our recruit hires year to date are at 8%. I feel that we can only go up from here, and that leads right into our work with the 30 by 30 initiative. The goals of the initiative, which was signed in January of 2023, are to increase female recruit representation in the academy to 30% by the year 2030, as well as increasing percentages of women in leadership roles. Commander Amy Smith and I have met regarding the 30 by 30 initiative, and we decided that we should create work groups and that it shouldn't just stop at the 2 work groups for the goals of the program, that retention and education and training are interwoven and closely connected to recruitment and promotion. Over 70 women were recommended by their supervisors to participate in the 30 by 30 program in these work groups. There were strong recommendations that came with really positive words of encouragement of these women to participate. So it's a really diverse group in work experience, current assignments, years on, backgrounds, things like that. And it's really exciting to get everybody together. Chief Sullivan attended the initial work group, as well as Ms. Bays, to encourage the group and show the city's commitment to this initiative, which was really positive. So the recruitment work groups, the goals of that are to see how we can get more women to respond to the call to action. The retention group will look at making life better and any kind of changes that the city can make or the police department can make to encourage retention. And the promotion group will assess the promotional process, mentorship, barriers to promotion, things like that. Education and training group will look to bring training to us, see what kind of internal training we can increase, and see where we can send women to training. When the city signed the contract with On Advertising, they were given very clear directive and timelines. So their first order of business is to redesign the website with mobile streamline, just to make sure that everything that we're putting out shows our commitment to recruitment and to hiring more officers. They're very close to presenting their final drafts of what the website will look like, and we're really encouraged at the work that they've done so far. They'll be updating our patrol fleet. We learned that it's the 3rd biggest driver to our website are actually our patrol vehicles that are out in our communities, which is exciting because we're trying to recruit from within our communities. So those are really good billboards for us and the positive work that we're doing. On Advertising is also working on creating content and a full marketing campaign. Part of this marketing campaign will be directed towards the 30 by 30 initiative, and they're well aware of that. We're also updating our recruiting materials to make sure that when we attend these events that our tables look professional and are updated with all of our current marketing. Here's how the police Tahoes look currently. You can see there's a really long website on there. In today's day and age, this doesn't make sense to have so many words and things in a website. So this is our proposed change. Our marketing team is doing amazing things with our recruiting social media, and so we'll add the Join PHXPD onto our vehicles so that everyone can follow our socials in a lot of different ways and see the great things that we're doing. We'll also add a QR code to the Tahoes to make it easier. One of our goals is to ensure that we are reaching our recruit pool where they are. So a lot of studies show that a lot of that is digitally. So the QR code will assist with that. Another exciting thing that we have in the works is this Chase Field billboard. So as the Diamondbacks go into the playoffs, hopefully they'll get a home game soon, and people are downtown for concerts, etc. They can see this joinphxpd.com billboard displayed proudly on Chase Field. For our recruiting unit strategies, we have created an advisory board working group where we've taken some feedback that a lot of our previous marketing campaigns did not speak to the communities. So what better way to figure out how to speak to these communities than to activate our advisory boards that we have really great relationships with. So we are working with that, and once given the deliverables from on advertising, we can move forward with bringing those to the advisory boards and making sure that they work for all areas of our community. We signed a GCU partnership, so that includes speaking in classes. It includes a lot of advertising in the athletic arenas. We're actually sponsoring a women's basketball game coming up in November, which is really exciting. And we have a lot of collegiate engagement, so our team is currently teaching. ASU has invited us into several of their classes. GCU, we just spoke last night. So we're branching out into lots of different areas of our community. Some of the multicultural recruiting events, in addition to the ones that have already read, include a Phoenix Union School District Back to School Expo, South Mountain Hiring Event, several Phoenix Mercury Games, SkillBridge recruiting events on Marine and military bases throughout the state and the area, as well as an enhanced social media presence. Our social media team is doing a great job of creating content, and their engagements have significantly improved. Some of our next steps in the next quarter when we come back to speak to you, we hope to update on the impact and results of implemented strategies. So again, I hope to have very positive news of final numbers for the end of the year with attrition and hiring. We'll also have a strong marketing strategy update and a 30 by 30 initiative update with more actionable items that have stemmed from those work groups. And with that, I will open it to questions and discussion.
Councilman Waring.
Madam Chair, so there were a lot of numbers, and we had another packet that had other numbers, but if I understand, we're planning on having 180 new officers this year, losing 135 for a net of 45, but we're down 560. So even if we kept up this pace, we're like more than 12 years away from getting back to where we've funded it. And of course, by then the city will have grown. We just grew 160. We grew about 10% this last 10-year period. I don't know why that would change. So we'd actually be falling further behind. Not trying to bag on you guys, but at some point, it's great that it's positive and move back into the black. But at some point, we need to redouble our efforts. So I hope that the new stuff you're talking about works well. I would also say, very important for the police department, to look like the city and everything, but I assume you're not saying you'd ever take a pass on a qualified candidate. I assume we're hiring regardless of who they are. If they can pass the test and you can put them out in the street with confidence that they're able to do the job, that's what you're doing. We need officers right now. See our discussion 2 items ago about the lack of motor patrol officers. We need that like yesterday. So you're nodding, I assume. You're not on camera, so I assume you're saying, yes, that's what we're doing. We're hiring whoever wants to come.
Madam Chair, Councilman Waring, yes, thank you for the comments. Absolutely, we are hiring the most qualified applicants. The presentation was designed to highlight some of our recruiting efforts in those diverse communities.
I just want to make sure anybody watching at home might be like, well, I mean, we really need people now, so should I apply or whatever? So I just want to make sure the focus is on getting officers. The second thing is that 13% of applications to an actual officer winding up on the street just seems so low. And I get that there's a lot of steps to it. And I know with the fire department, you get lots of people applying, and then they find out they're afraid of heights and fire. And maybe being a firefighter isn't the best job pick for them. So, you know, I'm sure that's the same for you guys. But again, anything you can do to bump that up. I know you're trying. I know you kind of talked about that. It just seems like it's so low considering the person is actually, like, they went and found Phoenix. They know they want to be a police officer. That's how they come to apply. It just seems like we should get more bang for the buck isn't the word, but a better return on our investment in terms of numbers of actual officers at the end of the day. Are other cities doing stuff we're not doing that produces a higher rate of return? I think that is the right way to look at it.
Madam Chair, members of subcommittee, Councilman Waring, yes, absolutely. I actually remember 16 years ago when I was getting hired that the recruiters told us to look around and the number was about 10%. So they said, look around the room, the number was about 10%. So I don't have the data with me of where we are. And as far as other cities, we are certainly always in constant communication with them to see if there's anything that we can do better or they're doing better. And what we're finding is that we're all on path and we're all looking for the same qualified applicants.
And one thing I was going to mention, Madam Chair, is, you know, that I don't think I ever had before. You know, maybe you're not a great fit for Phoenix, but, you know, we have enough knowledge, you guys have enough knowledge about departments and policing and so forth. Hey, you might be a good fit for Glendale. But then a Glendale applicant might be like, I don't know, I want to be like in Phoenix. You know, anything we do to partner with our sister cities and with the borders, I live right on the Scottsdale and Paradise Valley borders. I mean, if they hire an officer, they're pretty close by. That actually benefits Phoenix residents too, and vice versa. The important thing, to my mind, is to get the right fit so the person doesn't quit after a couple of years after all this effort expended. What you want is somebody who's going to be there for 25 years doing a good job. You know, preferably incident-free or, you know, within reason. So I don't know if that's possible. Maybe that would only make sense for the other cities, that they'd pick people off from us and not the other way around because we're so much bigger. But if we're not doing that, maybe a few cups of coffee with some of your peers in our surrounding cities might be worth the time, just to try to make sure that we're getting people into the profession in general that, you know, help protect citizens. Because, you know, Phoenix citizens shop in Scottsdale, vice versa. If there's something happens at a Scottsdale mall, they're going to be Phoenix citizens affected and a Scottsdale officer responding, et cetera, et cetera. So anything you can do to that, I think at a more regional model, would be appreciated by me, at the very least. So.
Madam Chair, Councilman Waring, just to speak on that last one, there is a regional work group with our background investigators throughout the region that meet, I believe, monthly, and they do discuss these different topics, and we do sit down and meet with our applicants to make sure the right fit, because Phoenix offers a lot of great things and a lot of opportunities, so we always make sure that we tout those kind of opportunities and see what would best fit each applicant. Certainly.
Just one more comment on this subject. The 13% just indicates to me, and I get that there are a lot of people who, you know, maybe have an officer in the family, but it turns out it's not for them. That's why they picked it. It wasn't necessarily their organic idea. They saw a movie, it seemed cool, a TV show, whatever. I get that, you know, these tend to be younger people, and so they're in, you know, they have less life experience to be influenced by, so sometimes the influences aren't as linear to the path that they should wind up taking as is, you know, I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do at 22 either. But you know, your guidance there can be really helpful. I just think the 13% indicates something about the process. It just seems low. Like it could be better. And even bumping that up to 20% would make a huge difference in chipping away at the 12 plus years we're looking at right now, just to being short-staffed 12 plus years from now, because that's really what we'd be saying if this is the path. So thought. Thank you. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Waring. Councilman Robinson.
Madam Chair, thank you very much. Sarah and Charmaine, excellent presentation, and I'm well aware of all the efforts that you make with regard to recruiting, and I think that's going to be the key. Everything we've talked about today, as Councilman Waring alluded to, I think what's important is we keep in mind, and I always remember Wayne Gretzky said it, you know, the great hockey player, and they asked him, why is he so good? He said, I go to where I think the puck is going to be. And that is why, or how he got to be as good as he was. And I say that because one of the things I hope we are able to do a little bit of research when we look at universities and colleges. We look at the more robust criminal justice, police science, and administration of justice programs. You know, that's where the puck is going to be. As we go about, as the organization goes about doing what it can to recruit, again, that's the key, as we go about recruiting, we need to go where the source is the best. I think there's only so much we're going to be able to do locally and talking to advisory boards and things like that, because these are things we've always done. I think we need to go where the source is more robust. And I would ask maybe on the next quarterly report that, Madam Chairman, if it's okay, I would ask that we hear from you and you talk about what programs are, from a criminal justice standpoint, and I'm talking to the junior colleges, community colleges, and the four-year universities, where do they have robust criminal justice programs, and what efforts are we making in that regard? So that was issue number one. The second issue is on media. The advertisement, I guess, if I heard correctly, and my notes, we're about to hear from them as to what they're doing. They haven't completed the web design just yet.
Madam Chair, members of Subcommittee, Councilman Robinson, yes, we're on round 2. They just presented round 2 for us of their proposal, and we're very close to running that by our advisory boards and things like that. So they're just finishing that up. We still have a few more photo shoots to give them of different officers from different areas of the department, things like that. But they're very close to the website redesign, yes.
And one thing I would ask the department consider is outside of the advisory boards, because again, I appreciate our advisory boards, but some of them are the same old folks we've always had, and we get sort of the same old responses from them. You know, I'd veer out a little bit. It's just a thought. You know, let's go elsewhere. I mean, to other groups, to other folks, and see what their responses are. I think that will help us going back to that recruitment. You know, having more officers. So, you know, the technology, where I still think it's important, you know, the technology may not be as important when we have more motor officers out there. So it all goes back to having an adequate number of police officers on the street. And like I said, I understand exactly where Councilman Waring is coming from, especially when he talks about at the rate we're going, how long it'll take us to get there. I think if we skate to where the puck is going to be, I think we'll be in a much better shape. Thank you, Madam Chair.
To Councilman Robinson's point, I think getting feedback from young people at our colleges and high schools might be beneficial in when we're looking at our recruitment and advertising, because certainly, although I'm sure our advisory boards are very smart, they're a different group than we're necessarily targeting, hopefully. I have a question about the 30 by 30 initiative committee. You said there were recommendations for, I think, 70-ish women from across the department. So are there any men on those committees?
Madam Chair, thank you for the question. Not just yet. They will be, we ran it as we run our advisory boards initially, where it's more of a kind of safe space so that we can freely speak our minds during that. There will be opportunities moving forward once they have those initial meetings to invite men into the discussion as well, because certainly there's lots to learn and there are a lot of really great opinions out there and things that can help from a different perspective. So certainly they will be invited to participate moving forward.
Okay, I think that is really important, because I think it's important for the men on our department to all be committed to the 30 by 30 initiative, because without them helping us to recruit here, I think this will be an even more difficult battle. So just want to make sure that we're including them not just the conversation, but in the whole initiative, and that they understand the importance of having the diversity around the table in all different aspects. To that point, Charmaine and I had an interesting conversation. It was in the recently. I had no idea that an officer could not be part-time in the state of Arizona. To tell you that I think that is absurd is an understatement. I actually have words for it that I won't say in this professional arena. It is 2023. Women are police officers, they are doctors, there's astronauts, they're all kinds of, they're firefighters, they're in all kinds of positions. And that we do not have a state law that allows women to work part-time is just ludicrous. So I would hope that our city would take the lead in working to get that law changed. If we hope to retain and attract women, we need, and it should be the same for men. I mean, I'm not going to exclude men from getting to work part-time, but women have babies, and women, take, not that the men don't help taking care of them when they're little, but, they're not the ones breastfeeding them if that's a choice they make. It is absurd that in today's day and age, and I'm not sure absurd might be the word for the day, that we do not allow part-time work, both for our women and our men, for whatever the reason. If there are men who need to take care of elderly parents or a wife or children as well, this should be an option in our city. I just, again, craziness. So I hope that we will, again, take the lead on that. Thank you for sharing that with me, Charmaine. We need to explore every avenue to make sure that we can have folks filling the spots. As Councilman Waring so eloquently pointed out, we're more than 12 years at the rate we're at right now of filling all of our vacancies, and that's just not acceptable to a city of 1.7 million that is growing and is in the fastest growing county. So I appreciate, again, the presentation. I would like in the future to know a little bit more about how some of the other changes that were already made have impacted recruitment, removing the test factor, all of those tweaks that you've made. If we could see how that has impacted, I'd like to see us making bigger strides in filling these positions. I know you're working diligently, but it would be nice to be filling more slots. So thank you for today.
Madam Chair, may I ask?
Yes.
You called me eloquent. Does that indicate you need to borrow $10 for lunch?
It actually doesn't. My daughter's bringing me lunch today, but
right.
maybe another time.
I appreciate it. Thank you. I'd be remiss. I was like, maybe she needs money.
No, not today, but thank you. All right. Our next item, which is for information and discussion, is train derailment response. And for that, we have Emergency Management Director Brian Lee and Assistant Chief Tim Kreis.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the subcommittee. Recent incidents involving derailment of commercial heavy rail transport trains have prompted police and fire public safety first responders, emergency managers, and city officials to review and assess their jurisdiction's emergency preparedness plans, as well as their operational state of readiness across the country, including here in the city of Phoenix. This briefing is a short overview of the city of Phoenix's response capability involving a heavy rain train derailment incident And while these derailment incidents are low in frequency, they are often high in consequence, which necessitates a large-scale emergency response. The United States has a comprehensive and interconnected railway infrastructure, and it is a critical component of the transportation sector under the National Infrastructure Protection Plan. The use of heavy rail trains for intermodal transportation is used across the country and internationally, including both Canada and Mexico. Rail transportation is highly cost-effective and an efficient way of moving large volumes of goods and commodities reliably. The expanding use of e-commerce, such as Amazon and other e-retailers, continue to drive the demand for transportation and shipping of goods by rail. The heavy rail system is used to efficiently transport almost anything by rail, including hazardous materials. The Federal Railroad Administration reported 518 nationwide derailments in 2022, resulting in 5 injuries, 0 deaths, but more than $100 million in property damage. Emergencies include not just derailments, but fires, leaks, mechanical failures, defective tracks, and others. The February 3rd, 2023 incident in Palestine, Ohio, involving a Norfolk Southern heavy rail train reminds us of the catastrophic impact a derailment incident is capable of, and the cascading impacts created by the unintentional dispersal of hazardous materials, chemicals, and toxic fumes resulting from subsequent fires at the scene. The Ohio incident involved approximately 50 rail cars, 11 of which were carrying the hazardous chemical vinyl chloride. A neighboring small town was evacuated and a controlled burn of the hazardous material was conducted. Air quality was monitored continuously, and it was more than a week before officials deemed the environment safe for residents to return to their homes. This continues to be an ongoing investigation. However, investigators have identified a faulty wheel bearing on one of the rail cars as a potential cause. This incident activated an emergency response, execution of mitigation strategies, and continues to work through the ongoing recovery phase of this incident to this day. Burlington Northern, Santa Fe, and Union Pacific are the 2 primary railway companies operating within the state of Arizona. BNSF primarily covers the northern half of the state, while Union Pacific primarily covers the southern portion. However, both companies conduct operations out of the Phoenix rail yard. The City of Phoenix maintains relations and actively partners with BNSF and Union Pacific when planning large-scale events at venues such as Chase Field, Footprint Center, and the Phoenix Convention Center. The City of Phoenix Office of Emergency Management, Phoenix Fire, and Police Departments have developed comprehensive plans as part of an all-hazards approach to manage a low-frequency, high-consequence event such as a train derailment. This map of Arizona railroads illustrates the BNSF and Union Pacific rail routes. The yellow lines show the Union Pacific routes, while the red lines depict BNSF's northern routes. There are currently no passenger trains operating, such as Amtrak, running through Phoenix, and have not since the October 9th, 1995 derailment incident, approximately 60 miles southwest of Phoenix. On July 29th of 2020, Tempe Police and Fire responded to a Union Pacific train that had 12 cars derail while on the bridge over the Tempe Town Lake and Lower Salt River. The bridge sustained a catastrophic collapse, and there was a release of subsequent fire associated with the hazardous materials on board the tankers. 2 of the cars contained cyclohexanone, a hazardous chemical material. This incident prompted a regional response via the mutual aid system, requiring more than 100 firefighters from Phoenix, Tempe, Chandler, Mesa, and Scottsdale who responded to assist. However, there were no reported injuries. On June 7th of this year, Coconino County emergency management officials responded to a BNSF train derailment in northern Arizona, just east of Williams. It was reported that as many as 23 rail cars had derailed in this remote area. The cargo was identified as new cars, trucks, and vans. There was no hazardous material on board or involved in the incident, and there were no injuries that were reported. The damage, however, was contained to the rail cars, the rail line, and the adjacent right-of-way. The Federal Railroad Administration investigators responded to that scene to investigate the cause. This chart provided by Union Pacific illustrates the percentage of revenues generated by the various commodity groups as a function of their business operations. Union Pacific has also advised that a stoppage of a railway activity for 1 hour to them is equivalent to a $1.2 million loss in revenue to the railway. Burlington Northern Santa Fe maintains a network of 32,500 route miles spanning 28 states and 3 Canadian provinces. Their primary commodities are agricultural products, consumer products, and industrial products. BNSF moves enough grain to supply 900 million people a year with a year's supply of bread annually. BNSF also moves up to 2 million pounds of fresh produce in one single day, and they move enough steel each year to build 75 Golden Gate bridges. The City of Phoenix Office of Emergency Management maintains the city's emergency operations plan to ensure a continuous state of operational readiness and emergency response preparedness for the City of Phoenix. In response to an incident, the Office of Emergency Management would respond along with police and fire departments to assess and coordinate resources with local, state, and federal agencies, as well as other city departments and both public and private stakeholders. The OEM director is responsible for activating the city's Emergency Operations Center, as well as activating the Joint Information Center. OEM also will coordinate with city communications, police, and fire PIOs for the release of messaging to the public, as well as internal employee notification of the incident and activation of the EOC, along with instructions for the city department staff to report for assignment based on their respective emergency support functions. OEM will facilitate the coordination of city department resources and personnel for use during the incident, which may include evacuations, sheltering, activation of a family reunification assistance center, etc. OEM will make notification to the Maricopa County Department of Emergency Manager, notifying them of the EOC's activation. And OEM is also responsible for the coordination with city leadership if an emergency declaration is made. OEM will continue to coordinate with MCDEM for the acquisition of additional resources from the county if and when all local resources have been exhausted. And OEM will provide updates and communication to the city manager throughout the duration of the event. Police personnel are responsible for the coordination with fire on scene and will quickly assess and report the approximate size, nature, and location of the incident as soon as possible. They would request fire department's hazardous materials team via the radio dispatch communication system, and they would also notify the police safety unit. Police personnel would establish a unified command and control operations under the incident command system protocols in accordance with our existing departmental policies. Officers would then isolate the incident to prevent entry and exit into the defined hot zone, except for those personnel specially equipped to be in that area. In cases of hazardous materials release, officers will assume positions that afford them the greatest personal protection from the hazard, away, uphill, upwind, upstream, etc. And officers will establish perimeter controls and facilitate the ingress and egress for rescue and emergency personnel. Officers would be responsible for helping to coordinate the evacuation efforts with the fire department and provide necessary resources for the evacuation areas that are not yet exposed, or what we refer to as cold zones, with regard to the hazardous materials. Officers would provide traffic control routing on the outer perimeter of the incident, and for an extended incident, police command would coordinate with the fire department to assess the population affected, the complexity of the incident, and the expected duration of engagement, and will activate the Tactical Operations Center and or implement a unified incident management team if necessary. At this time, I'd like to turn the presentation over to Fire Assistant Chief Tim Kreis with the Phoenix Fire Department's response options.
You can keep that. Thank you, Director Lee. Madam Chairwoman, members of the subcommittee, the fire department focuses significant organizational care as it relates to our ability to successfully respond to incidents involving freight trains and associated emergent conditions. It really starts with training. So all of our firefighters are required to have first responder certification in hazardous materials emergencies. That was something I went through almost 20 years ago now. In addition, those firefighters that are part of our special operations program receive additional comprehensive training on hazardous materials emergency operations. Firefighters learn about all types of rail equipment to include locomotives, pressurized and non-pressurized rail cars, box cars, etc. They also learn about the different types of valves and fittings, material offloading operations, and historical emergencies, and that one is extremely important, especially to me. This training is conducted often in partnership with the local railroads, as Director Lee discussed, and there's classroom instruction as well as functional drills. And to sustain our capabilities, the Special Operations Division has annual continuing education and training on rail emergencies. When we respond to a rail emergency, firefighters rapidly assess the situation to determine the scope, scale, and hazards involved, and they assess the need for life safety and the status of folks like the folks who are working in the locomotive, the conductor and the engineer, the neighborhoods, etc. The first arriving fire company establishes the incident command system and implements our incident management procedures, and these procedures will expand to include law enforcement and rail partners and others, as Director Lee discussed. Firefighters are trained to recognize hazardous materials in rail cars, and we have placarding, of course, on all those rail cars, which is required by the federal government. Our fire trucks all have what's called an emergency response guidebook in them, and it's a requirement. I have one in my truck as well, and it goes through all the different types of tank cars and placarding so we can quickly identify those things. And then we develop our deployment strategies to mitigate the hazards at the scene. And we also work with PD and others for evacuation shelter locations and the establishment of hot, warm, and cold zones. Plume modeling is something that is an important capability that I'd like to underscore in this presentation. Our special operations personnel have the training and equipment for plume modeling. Knowing the hazardous material involved in the emergency, the container, the amount, our firefighters can calculate the impact and potential impact of a hazardous materials emergency. With this information, we make refined tactical decisions, guide emergency messaging to include evacuation or shelter in place orders. In addition, firefighters account for the weather, temperature, wind speed, and direction, and we work closely with key partners like the Arizona Department of Environmental Quality.
During an incident such as a train derailment, the primary emergency support functions such as the fire department, which is ESF4 in our world, would take the lead on the messaging from the public information officer standpoint. A variety of messaging platforms are available to ensure appropriate saturation and delivery of emergency information to the public, as well as internally to the City of Phoenix personnel via the Everbridge system. The Office of Emergency Management would establish a joint information center, as previously discussed, if needed, and can coordinate with the city's communication team to ensure accuracy of information, special instructions to the public, and to our affected City of Phoenix personnel in a timely manner, ensuring the ability to speak with one voice on behalf of the city. The Office of Emergency Management and the communications team would work collaboratively with the first responders on messaging to the public for topics such as evacuation instructions, routing, or shelter-in-place recommendations. And anecdotally, this morning, the Office of Emergency Management successfully conducted its annual test of the wireless emergency alert system prior to the federal system test that we all experienced here today. So we are in compliance with county requirements for another year. See, the City of Phoenix coordinates with all federal agencies as necessary throughout the investigation of a train derailment, ensuring that jurisdictional compliance with all of our affected entities are adhered to. OEM is also going to coordinate with all of the impacted city departments to engage resources and personnel throughout the duration of the incident, from operational response to mitigation through recovery. This chart provides a summary of the actions that the City of Phoenix Public Safety first responders would work through from the start to final disposition of a train derailment hazardous materials incident. The individual city department policies have been developed to seamlessly integrate within a collaborative and unified command system involving the police and fire departments, as well as the Office of Emergency Management. This concludes our presentation at this time, and we'd be happy to open it up for any questions the subcommittee might have.
Questions? Councilman Robinson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just out of curiosity more than anything else, the train derailments and things we see across the country, have they all been because of some type of neglect or some other accident type of thing with regard to the...
Part of the initial response to this type of an incident would involve response from our federal partners as well, up until the point that it would be handled locally to the point where there may be information to suggest that it might involve some nexus to a terrorist incident. At that point, then the primary disposition and focus would then turn to our federal partners who would take the lead on that type of an investigation. Of the ones that have been conducted here that we've seen across the nation recently, I'm not aware of any that have risen to that level of criminal investigation.
Okay, thank you very much, and it was an exceptional presentation. Thank you, guys.
Thank you both. I want to especially thank you, because after seeing some of the major crashes that has happened across the country and knowing that we have tracks that go through our city, wanted to make sure that we understood how well prepared our first responders are and to take care of our citizens in case something like this were to occur in Phoenix. I'm just going to knock on wood so that won't ever happen. But again, thank you for the presentation. The next two items are for information only, and we do have them on a cycle where one of the three information only will come before the committee for a discussion. Having said that, do we have any additional call to the public? No.
Madam Chair, we do not.
No more. Okay, then I'm just going to ask if we have any requests for future agenda items.
I would like to know, to follow up on one of the items we had today, you already asked for, you reiterated my request for different statistics. One statistic I'd like is, do we track at all of the applicants we get for the police department? We talked about the 13%. How many become officers in other departments? They applied to us. We have those numbers. It would be concerning if you applied to us and 40% of those people actually became police officers, most of them not for us. So that's something I'd like an evaluation of, because that might be indicative of a problem with us, not so much the process. Second, I had asked Madam Chair, and I think you've already indulged me, but to put something on again about the light rail security. I was reviewing the notes in the minutes, and it talked about, oh, there's a 1 in 3 chance somebody's going to be on your train to help you. Well, what I had forgotten to ask at the time was those trains are all those cars are all sealed. So just because somebody's on your train doesn't mean they're going to be able to help you if something happens in the car you're in, unless you happen to be in the car they're in. So there are going to be a few more questions along that vein. Might actually ask to show some videos. The latest is a Charger Raider game, just to show Valley Metro, and frankly our staff, what happens when other people, not you, are fighting near you. There have been many incidents at NFL games this year, including the Cardinal Commander game, the first game of the season, where fans have been sitting there and like right next to them, a crazy fight's happening with people being knocked out. So I think at the time there was implication of like, well, the people who are sneaking on are fighting each other, so you don't need to worry about it. That's absurd. So a Patriot fan actually died at a game in the second week of the season. So just, again, food for thought, but I definitely want to revisit that issue, and I want to know what's been done since our last meeting. Thank you. Sorry to go on.
No, absolutely. I was just going to tell you it is slotted for the December meeting. Yes. to rediscuss light rail and to understand what has taken place since they implemented their new program in September. Any other requests, council members? Okay. Having said that, we will adjourn. Thank you.
And to the Phoenix Historic Property Register in October 1992, later adjusted in March 2004.
It was always my dream to be a police officer, and staying 36 years, a little bit more than 36 years, was a bonus. You know, I was able to live out that dream of being able to not just be a police officer, but to help folks. And I thought that's what I did as a police officer. I was there to help folks at times when it was probably the worst day of their lives, in some cases.